I'm Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. Big black holes of debt. Stacy Herbert, tell us more.
Max, well, we know that Ireland has fallen into this black hole of never-ending debt.
Just give the viewers a little background here. The government backstopped all the banks and all deposits, and then the banks promptly set up NAMA, which is a big black hole, a cesspool of non-accountability, and they just keep racking up these huge unaccounted for debts and then squeezing the public with their austerity measures. So it's really financial torture.
Well, NAMA is National Asset Management Agency. So the government took these debts and they call them assets. This is the wealth of the people now. These are the bad debts of Anglo-Irish Bank mostly. And now the people themselves are having to give up real assets, i.e. their own national wealth and their resources in order to make good on those assets.
Right, so they had a bunch of debts, and then as part of the reconfiguration, when there was this coup by the bankers of the country, they called the debts assets. And now to pay for the assets, they're going to actually start to liquidate the people's actual assets.
That's correct. It sounds like a scam to me. So we're going to go over some other scams and money laundering operations around the world. The first one, virtual pigs and chooks. See Payday for Crooks. This is New South Wales in Australia. And apparently, according to the police chief there, virtual worlds like Farmville and World of Warcraft are being used by criminals to launder money, who have discovered that buying and selling virtual items and currency is a growing new way of cleaning dirty money.
Well, on this show, we've talked about Farmville, Facebook, Zynga, the virtual currency, Goldman Sachs' deal to take Facebook public in an illegal way. Just like the bank in the past has committed acts of fraud first, and then gone to the government and the lawmakers and asked them to pass new laws that would be effective retroactively to cover the laws that they broke. They have broken this law with the Facebook deal, and of course Facebook owns Farmville, and they do a deal with Zynga, and they issue all this virtual currency, which is now being used by crooks to launder money in the same way that Ben Bernanke uses the Federal Reserve to launder money, the same way Goldman Sachs uses the New York Stock Exchange to launder money. Now they've got virtual money laundering going on right under everybody's noses, and they've got billions of dollars in valuations, and this will be the next huge, let me make a prediction here, Stacy Herbert, the next big crash after we've had the real estate crash and the sovereign debt crash will be the virtual market crash, because in the virtual market, these things are trading for billions and multi-billions of dollars in valuation. They've yet to be even made public, and this will be a huge crash to come. So this is going to be a momentous, beautiful crash of epic proportion. I can hardly wait.
Well, but Max, remember all these Arab revolutions, all the freedom, the alternative media erupting in the United States. This is happening because of the freedom of the internet. And this could be a way for the governments and the authorities to say it's online where all the bad things happen. This is where to look. They're trying to distract you from the banking crimes that are happening in Europe, in America, and around the world. In this article, they speak to Alistair McGibbon, who is the founding head of Australia's high-tech crime center, and he puts this into context, the money laundering happening online. So remember, Citibank, JP Morgan, these big banks, Anglo-Irish Bank, took trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. He says, but compared to laundering money at the track or casino or offshore financial havens, I would suggest that the online stuff is a fraction of a fraction compared to all the other ways that criminals launder funds, which are still very successful. You don't innovate as a criminal unless you have to. And while this may sound really cool, I would suggest that traditional means of money laundering are still pretty effective.
For now. I mean, it's a growth industry. And remember, you've got to back in the valuation on a company like Goldman Sachs, who is, in effect, a criminal syndicate. We have to incorporate that into your multi-billion-dollar money laundering equation when you're examining the Facebook scam.
So let's look at, as he mentions, traditional means of money laundering. So let's look at how they are still successful in the world today. Headline reads, Bill Gross says treasuries have little value, echoing Buffett. So Bill Gross, we've spoken of him many times. He runs the world's largest bond fund. And he writes on his website that his firm has been selling treasuries because they have little value within the context of a $75 trillion debt burden. The U.S. has unrecorded debt of $75 trillion, or close to 500% of gross domestic product, counting what it owes on its bonds plus obligations for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. He says if the U.S. doesn't reform its entitlement programs, it's going to have to go bankrupt.
Well, it is technically bankrupt. And talking about the U.S. bond market, because a lot of these bonds end up in pension accounts from the people who are getting these so-called entitlement programs, the people who saved money over many decades, who created the backbone for the American economy, who actually are the capital to create the capitalism that is America. Those people are being disenfranchised by bond speculators who are laundering their losses and laundering money through the U.S. government treasury bond market as it appears in these pension accounts. They transfer losses, guaranteed losses. That's the problem with the U.S. government treasury bond market, is that if you're buying these bonds today, you're locking in a guaranteed loss of capital. But of course, nobody's telling the pension holders and the pension funds this stark fact, and they're going to wake up one day, find out they're down 40%, and everyone on Wall Street in the city of London and in Washington will say, we never saw it coming, it was a huge accident, we're just going to have to try better next time, when it was a planned demolition, a wealth confiscation scheme, more money laundering, and more financial terrorism from the folks in Washington and Wall Street colluding together once again to destroy everything.
And the other thing to note here is this propaganda pushed onto the people that these are entitlement programs, that they didn't contribute to them 15% of their income for the last 40, 50 years, that they were putting money into this and the money is owed them. They were basically lending it to the government, who then speculated and basically bailed out banks.
That's right. They deferred their income to help the government. So what's the government do to say thank you? They steal the money. Okay, that's not cause for an insurrection in America. Nothing is.
And it also reminds me of what happened to Greece and Portugal and Ireland, is in particular Greece, where the bond guys basically said, give up your wealth or we're going to crash your bond market. And actually, Bill Gross uses the phrase, we are out-Greeking the Greeks.
Yeah, they know that they can use the markets as a tool of terrorism to extract wealth and terrorize the population.
He mentions Greece. Let's move on to Greece. Greece may need to break taboo on selling land to slash debt.
Told you, I predicted this was going to happen.
So apparently the Greek government is aiming to generate 50 billion euros from state asset sales, there's that word again, and property transactions by 2015 to reduce Greece's public debt. But those plans may fail if one looks at the polls, which show that the Greek citizens, 58% of them wanted state lands to be developed but not sold. And of that number, 66% supported laws that would stop any sale of public land. Well, to this, the Bloomberg reports Miltos Kambarides, who is a managing partner at Dolphin Capital Partners, registered in the British Virgin Islands. These plans may fail, he said, if the government succumbs to pressure to keep assets in public hands. The Greek people want to have their cake and eat it too.
Yes, Marie Antoinette overtones there. Listen, there's a lot of rich folk in America who'd love to own a Greek island and get it on the cheap. They caused the crisis in Greece. They're controlled demolition experts using financial technology and weapons of mass financial destruction. The entire Greek economic crisis was manufactured by the IMF and the World Bank and the global cartel of banking scum.
Well, he's actually gone one step beyond Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette offered the peasants cake. She said, here, have cake, eat it. But this guy is saying they have their cake, but they want to eat it too? Why don't they go to Farmville like little peasants and eat their fake cake on Farmville?
Fake cake. It's fake cake. Oh, it is torture. It's like, here's the cake. Here's the cake. No, it can't have any. Here's the cake. No, it can't have any. Here's some olives. Here's some ouzo. No, can't have any more. Sorry, you're a slave now. You work for these global banking cartel, and we bought all your islands for pennies on the dollar, and that was our intention from the very beginning.
Well, the guy, actually, Kambarides, he used to work for Goldman Sachs, so perhaps he has some ownership, some shares in Farmville.
Wow, what a shock that is.
But speaking of virtual cakes, you know, if you have a virtual job and work for virtual pay, you might be able to afford those. So here's this headline, Max. Not even in Zimbabwe, at the height of hyperinflation, were even dedicated hospital staff willing to go to work once the bus fare exceeded their wages. Yet in the United States, The economic conditions seem so bad that workers are willing to make a loss just to say they have a job. So there are 14 million unemployed Americans, and apparently a lot of them are now taking to just working for free to keep their resume padded out.
Yeah, well, let me explain something to you. If you're showing up at a job and you're putting in hours and you're getting no money, you can't technically call that work. It's amazing that in the U.S., they've been successful in destroying any collective bargaining rights of anybody. As if the point of those who are fighting against collective bargaining isn't to force everyone's hourly wage down to zero. Do you get that number, zero? You'll be picking cotton in the fields for less than $1 a day because you're too stupid to stand up for your own rights, and collective bargaining is how you negotiate with banking terrorists and the cartel. You know, the bankers are engaged in collective bargaining every single day at the discount window of the Federal Reserve Bank, where they collectively bargain for virtually free money.
Now, they speak to a CEO, and she says people who work for free are far hungrier than anybody who has a salary, so they're going to outperform. They're going to try to please. They're going to be creative, she said.
Yeah, how many Americans does it take to screw in a light bulb? About 300 million. As long as you're not paying them anything, who cares? Hire all of them.
She goes on to say that she's convinced it's the wave of the future, paying these people nothing. 10 years from now, this is going to be the norm, she says.
Yeah, well, they had a model like that 150 years ago. It was called slavery. They abolished it, but the folks who down in the South, political bloc in America, they never forgot the joys of slavery, and they want to bring it back. And the Ku Klux Klan, I suppose, as well, and cross burning and all the accoutrements that go with slave owning in America.
And in America, you know, they don't have the luxury of a bus or public transport like they do in Zimbabwe, where they also had this sort of situation. Now, one needs loads of oil in order to drive to and from work. So I'm going to take you to the final headline here. Whereas Americans are going to work for free, Saudis aren't even getting out of bed for less than $83 a barrel.
Wow, that sounds even more egregious than Kate Moss.
OPEC set for $1 trillion export revenues. So Fatah Barrel, the chief economist at the IEA, said that a new assessment by the rich nation's oil watchdog showed that the total number of barrels exported by OPEC in 2007 would be slightly lower than 2008, but their income would be $1 trillion due to the increased cost. And that Saudi Arabia, however, because of all their promises to the people in order to avoid an uprising, a revolution, they need oil now at $83 a barrel. Otherwise, they can't meet all their obligations, and then there's revolution. So we're caught in a spiral.
And we're going to get into a lot of that stuff after the break when I get in touch in Austin, Texas with Alex Jones. Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned. When we come back, Alex Jones. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to Austin, Texas, and speak with Alex Jones. Alex Jones has basically delivered Fox News and mainstream media a black eye because he is skyrocketing popularity. Ever since 2000, two things have been moving up: gold and Alex Jones. Alex Jones, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Max, thanks for having me. But, you know, the alternative media has been skyrocketing in the last decade as well. I'm just riding on the crest of that because we do tell the truth. We do give people deep analysis across the political spectrum, breaking down what's happening on the geopolitical front. So liberty and a global awakening, a revolt against the New World Order banksters is expanding worldwide, not just the reach of Infowars.com.
Yeah, I think just a lot of us in the media business are enjoying laughing at Rupert Murdoch and his pet Glenn Beck as they burn and crash. I mean, Murdoch's launched a daily newspaper recently. It's been a failure. He's launched MySpace.com. He took over and completely destroyed it. That's been a failure. Wall Street Journal he bought at the top. That's been a total failure. So here's a monopolist who's failing on every front. Meanwhile, independent media is doing well. And recently there's been some stories in the New York Magazine. You've been on The View, a big popular show in the U.S., and you're just basically busting out of the gate here. But your message is different than what people are used to, because you are focusing on building this coalition of informed people to take back the government and take back their rights. And that's your primary focus, not the profit motive, correct?
Yes. Well, the corporate system likes to brand things liberal or conservative, and then basically the establishment controls both of those arms and then plays them off against each other to limit the scope of the paradigm to kind of keep people in the box. But what's been happening is more and more people see Obama continuing the policies of Bush, who basically continued the policies of Clinton, who continued the policies of George Herbert Walker Bush. You see Congress with an 11% approval rating. Government is discredited, and these big mega monopolies are becoming discredited, and so you have many of Rupert Murdoch's ventures imploding or falling on their face. You have many of the old establishment liberal publications floundering around, also losing readers to the internet. But we are in a very dangerous area of history right now, because the system still has a lot of power and has the incentive now to try to discredit and begin to carve away and shut down the free internet as we have known it, because that level playing field is allowing a true diversity, a true spectrum of ideas and debate to take place, and it's expanding people's awareness and giving people more options. You know, it's like going back decades ago when you couldn't go to a grocery store and buy organic food. But slowly, as people demanded it now, you go to a major grocery store, more than half the vegetables and fruits and other foods are organic, because we've built that market of choice, starting with very small little health food stores and vitamin stores, building up their clientele and then expanding. Well, it's the same thing with alternative media. Basically, the old line media is like the horse and buggy whip manufacturers in 1910 or so, still being arrogant, saying we don't have to worry about cars, they're no competition. And just a decade later, every major horse and buggy whip maker was basically bankrupt.
Let me ask you about the report now that's talking about the Pentagon. It's using what they call sock puppets. This is a phrase that's become common now. People are talking about these sock puppets or trolls. Tell us about what a sock puppet is and what's the significance of this story.
Look, if you go back even 6-7 years ago, the Pentagon admitted that CENTCOM and others had hired tens of thousands of private bloggers through public relations firms all over the world to engage in global disinformation and to also engage in disinformation here domestically. And now they're basically adopting that same Pentagon system and expanding it to go out with computer systems that in mass pose as individuals, spamming the internet message boards and commenting systems with ridicule of anyone that questions any government lies as a conspiracy theorist. They're also now basically setting up more and more quasi-media watchdog organizations that also go out as so-called experts and demonize the alternative media. And the amazing thing about this is it's now admitted that they've got fake robot computer systems out spamming the web, posing as individuals, that they've got armies of bloggers that they've hired doing this in the United States and all over the world. And Israel, going back many years, admits they actually have computer programs that alert hundreds of thousands of paid minions who also go out and do this. But people are beginning to really recognize this new form of spam. And so the internet, as a really living, breathing system that humans breathe life into, has its own immune system and is getting smarter and smarter as really the group collective, the group consciousness of the web becomes more and more astute at instantly identifying the government robot trolls and the physical individual trolls.
Right, and of course you've mastered the art of overwhelming the bots with the Google bombs that you've launched, which have been very, very successful. I want to talk about something here. Food stamp usage has doubled in the past 2 years since the financial terrorist attacks of 2008. And 3 states with the fastest growing usage are Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming. where federal aid is something that they turn their nose up at, they sniff at. So how does this work exactly? Because here you have 3 states that are, quote, anti-government, but they have this huge increase in food stamps from the government. There's this huge disconnect. How is that done possible? How is the propaganda so effective? How are they able to push that, Alex Jones? How do you think, what's going on here?
Well, Max, that's a very sophisticated question. There's a lot of factors. Obviously, 42 of the states are technically bankrupt. The federal government itself is admitting that it's preparing to take the states into receivership, but the federal government has been bankrupted by the central banking derivative scams, and this has all been engineered to consolidate wealth, to vertically integrate it. And so you do have states that have tried to stay independent, tried to not take federal aid, but because of the financial terrorism that you mentioned, they're so devastated that individuals are basically surviving, more and more of them, off of the food stamps. And that's really the catch-22. The banksters come in, they take over the government. The lion's share of the money goes to interest on debt that they have tricked the government onto signing on to. And then the fake right-wingers come in and make the whole debate about cutting general welfare for the poor when that's only a small part of the overall debt. And so they shift the debate over to cutting basic social safety net and blaming the giant deficits on that when it's a very small piece of it. If you don't get rid of the international banksters, if you don't write off the $1,000+ trillion in derivatives that they've tricked our governments in the U.S., in Greece, in Ireland, into signing on to, if we don't say no to this debt, as Ron Paul and others have said, and point out that it's not ours, and make Wall Street take a haircut, then nothing will fix this debt black hole that's been created. And so now the banksters will play the left, the control left, and say, we've got to keep taxes going up. We've got to, pay all this into the Treasury, or you're going to kick old ladies off Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. You're going to kick poor single moms off food stamps. They play the left on one side. Then on the right, they come in and blame all the problems on the social safety net, and then they cause a controlled paradigm fight at that level. And then meanwhile, the bankers hope no one notices that they're the ones that have actually made off with the majority of the money.
All right, so last week in Holland, the people demanded that the government prevent a bank in Holland, ING. They said, we're going to withdraw all our money unless the government steps in and cancels all of the bonuses to the executives at ING. The government acquiesced. They forced the bank to cancel those bonuses. The people won. Is this something that can work in the United States? Will it come to the United States? Is the global insurrection against banker occupation coming to the United States in a serious way, Alex Jones?
Yes, it is. I mean, if you go back 10 years ago, Ron Paul couldn't even get 1 or 2 co-sponsors for his bill to audit the private Federal Reserve. Last year, his bill passed in the House. They used a procedural move to block it in the Senate. But in major polls, over 80% of the public want to audit or abolish the private Fed, which is just the local arm here in the U.S. of this private banking cartel. And so, yes, people are moving against the bankers. They are identifying the private mega banks, not your local bank, but the private mega banks, as the criminal cartels that are engaged in the financial terrorism and the vertical integration and consolidation of the planet's wealth. They are launching financial warfare against us. But the bankers have actually tried to spin things into just cutting some of the bonuses for their employees. What about the shareholders, the mega rich of these big mega banks who are making, in some cases, billions and billions of dollars per quarter? What about just writing off all that debt that they created, that they've paid off our governments to sign on to through too big to fail? What about just saying, forget the bonuses, forget everything, quit holding us hostage. We don't owe this money. This is stuff you created. You keep your toxic assets and let the chips fall where they may. Because if we don't go ahead and cut it off, at the knees, they're going to continue to just drag us down. That's what they're masters of, is getting everybody's pension funds and investments mixed in with their Ponzi schemes, where then nobody wants to end the Ponzi scheme because it'll bring down the whole system. Well, the Ponzi scheme's already bringing it all down. And so if we're going to go down, let's take the bankers with us. Let's get rid of them. Let's discredit them so that they don't use the crisis to get even more power. They're already bringing us into total collapse. They plan to use it to get total control. Let's go ahead and just bring it all down, and then in the process, I have Nuremberg trials for these criminals and bring them to justice, and then rebuild our republics as the people see fit, as the Declaration of Independence states.
Brilliant. Alex Jones, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Max, thanks for having me.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Alex Jones. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.